Try to imagine walking through a narrow, muddy street in Paris in the late 1200s. The air smells of wood smoke, damp earth, horse sweat, and something baked. The sounds are just as thick, the steady hum of carts, the crack of hooves, and the deep ring of church bells rolling through the sky. These weren't just background noise, they were the heartbeat of the city. Every bell had meaning. They didn't tell you it's 2 p.m. They told you when to pray, when to open your bakery, when the market closed, or when it was time to rest. In those days, people didn't live by clocks like we do. In fact, most people never even saw a mechanical clock. Time was something you felt through the sky, the shadows, the sound of bells. The day didn't move by minutes and seconds, but by light and dark, work and prayer, sun and stars. Back then, instead of equal 60-minute hours, time shifted with the seasons. A summer hour could stretch long into the afternoon, while a winter one might be over before you'd boiled a pot of stew. Monks and townsfolk alike followed a structure of spiritual hours: matins, prime, tercer, sext, none, vespers, and compline, each marked not by numbers but by feeling, by mood, by purpose. It wasn't about being exact, it was about staying in rhythm with the church, with nature, with each other. Without watches, people leaned on what was available. One simple solution was candles. Not the ones just used for light, these were specially marked, sometimes notched or layered with colored wax. You could measure a lecture, a court hearing, or a quiet reading session just by watching wax melt. In places like the University of Paris, candle weight and burn rate were even standardized. A burning candle made time feel real. You could see it slipping away. It didn't tick or chime, it glowed, melted, and disappeared. It made people think about more than just schedules. A shrinking candle reminded you that life itself was shrinking too. There was something poetic in it. In many monasteries and homes, this small flame helped shape the day, especially at night when bells couldn't be heard and the stars were clouded over. For a different kind of quiet precision, some places used water clocks. These were vessels where water dripped slowly from one bowl into another. Not exactly Swiss accuracy, but for their time they were reliable. Unlike sundials, they didn't care about clouds or darkness. That made them useful in cold scriptoriums where monks copied manuscripts deep into the night. Some cathedrals even had keepers just to maintain these devices, refilling them, checking the drip rate, adjusting when needed. It's almost calming to think of this, some lone person in a quiet church hall tending a bowl of dripping water to help mark prayer times. That rhythm of drops falling into silence became the only sound scholars heard as they worked through the night. Of course, most people didn't have candles or clocks. They had shadows. For a peasant working in a field, the sun was the main timekeeper, a shadow reaching long across the grass. It's late. A short, stubby one. That's around noontime to eat. No need for tools, just the instinct built from years of looking at the ground. The sun told shepherds when to move the flock. It told craftsmen when to pack up. In cloudy weather, when the sun disappeared, people turned to other signs: a rooster crowing, a church bell ringing in the distance, the smell of bread in the wind, or just muscle memory, the way their bodies told them what came next after a lifetime of repetition. Time wasn't broken down like it is now. It flowed naturally. Some days felt long, others vanished quickly. No one expected perfect precision. People expected rhythm. That same sense of rhythm reached into the night sky. For sailors, monks, and scholars, the stars weren't just beautiful, they were reliable. Watching the heavens was one of the oldest ways of telling time. The North Star gave direction, the constellations gave hours. Orion rising might mean it was deep night. The Big Dipper swinging high could mean it was time for the next watch to take over on the castle walls. Guards, monks, even farmers who rose early, they learned to read the sky like a slow-moving clock. One of the most amazing tools from that time was the astrolabe. It looked like a metal disc covered in symbols and rotating parts. To the untrained eye, it seemed like a puzzle. But in skilled hands, it revealed the position of stars, the time of day, even directions for travel. Students in universities studied it carefully, while travelers on the road kept simpler versions close. For people who believed that the heavens reflected the will of God, reading the sky was more than useful. It was spiritual. It meant watching for signs, understanding patterns, and feeling part of something greater. They believed that if the stars ever stopped moving, time itself would stop too. That's why medieval timekeeping wasn't just about knowing what hour it was. It was about understanding where you stood in the season, in the prayer cycle, in the movement of the world. It was part of faith. This idea of time also led to big questions in the universities. Students and teachers argued not just about when things happened, but what time really was. Was it a thing that existed outside of us, or just a way we made sense of change? Some said time was tied to the motion of the stars. Others believed it lived only in the human mind, shaped by how we saw the world. These debates weren't just for fun. They shaped how people thought about laws, the calendar, even ethics. Without a universal clock, time was always a little flexible. Liturgical calendars, for example, didn't follow math. They followed divine rhythms. That's why medieval time often felt deeply personal, less about being on time and more about being in the right moment. Most people didn't track time by days and hours, but by the land itself. They remembered the year not because it was 1311, but because it was the year the frost came early, or the year the barley was thin. Farming cycles shaped everything. Spring meant cautious planting. Summer meant long, hot days of labor. Fall was a race to gather what you'd grown. Winter brought quiet, stillness, and often hunger. Soldiers lived by these same patterns. You didn't march in the deep mud of winter. Roads closed, rivers froze, and days were too short. Armies usually moved in spring or summer, and many campaigns paused when weather or hunger became too much. Time wasn't a straight line, it was a circle, one that repeated again and again with the seasons. Even events in life, births, deaths, marriages, were remembered according to nature's clock. The year the river froze before All Saints' Day, the year the orchard failed. This was how people kept time in their heads. Even if many medieval people couldn't read or write, they still kept time through faith. The calendar they followed wasn't marked by numbers but by holy days, saints' feasts, and fasts. Someone might not know it was March 24th, but they'd know it was the feast of Saint Gabriel. These days didn't just guide worship, they structured the whole year. Religious life and daily life moved together. Lent meant certain foods disappeared. Easter meant time off. Christmas wasn't just a day. It kicked off weeks of celebration. Farmers planted by saints' days, not by numbered dates. Whole villages moved with the rhythm of the church, not the tick of a hand. It gave structure to life without needing to calculate every hour. In monasteries, the schedule was even more detailed. Monks woke before sunrise, prayed several times a day, and even got up at night for quiet chanting in the dark. Their time was wrapped around prayer, built to align with both the heavens and the holiness they believed ruled above. A bell would wake them, a chant would guide them, and a candle would light the next sacred hour. Even the way people remembered their lives was wrapped in this rhythm. Someone might say, that was the year we fasted through the floods, or the last feast of Saint Michael before the fire. These spiritual markers weren't just religious, they were real, emotional memories that helped people make sense of their past. Maps from that time show this too. They didn't just chart roads or borders, they placed Earth within the story of creation, showing Adam and Eve or Noah's Ark alongside cities and rivers. Chronicles didn't just list years and events, they placed everything inside a divine story from the Garden of Eden to the final judgment. That's how people saw time, not as a line going forward endlessly, but as a story unfolding with a clear beginning and a clear end. It wasn't random, it was purposeful. Every season, every day, every hour was part of something bigger. But around the early 1300s, something began to change. In cities across Europe, a quiet revolution started, not with war or new kings, but with the ticking of gears. Mechanical clocks were born. These weren't wristwatches or phones, they were massive, clunky, often inaccurate machines, but they did something no sundial or candle ever could. They made time equal. For the first time, hours didn't grow or shrink with the sun. They were fixed. A winter hour was just as long as a summer one, no matter how much daylight you had. It sounds small, but this changed everything. At first, these clocks were placed high in town towers where everyone could hear them strike. Bells began ringing on the hour, not just for prayers but for meetings, shop openings, legal matters. Slowly, cities started to tick like the gears inside the clock itself. Markets opened on time. Courts ran on schedules. People began to be expected to arrive not just at dawn or after prayers but at a specific hour. It was a new kind of pressure, a new kind of order. Time was becoming something measured, controlled, and enforced. Over the next century, the clocks got smaller. Springs replaced weights. Eventually, some wealthy people could carry clocks with them. Time was no longer tied to nature or community. It could fit in your pocket. It could travel. For the first time, time belonged to individuals. This was a big shift. It didn't just make trains and factories possible in the future. It changed how people saw themselves and their days. Work became more structured. Journeys became more predictable. Life started to fit inside measured blocks. Still, even as mechanical clocks spread, the older ways of living time didn't vanish overnight. Many rural places kept following the sun, the seasons, the saints. The rhythm of bells and birds still echoed across villages long after cities had adopted the tick of iron. People still watched the sky, still listened for roosters, still used candlelight to mark the end of the day. The old sense of time lingered like a soft breath under the sharp click of new machines. Looking back, you can see how time in the medieval world was not just about hours and minutes. It was about feeling part of something living. You didn't manage time. You moved inside it. It flowed around you like weather or wind. The sound of a bell was more than a schedule. It was a moment of belonging. The shrinking of a candle wasn't just a countdown. It was a quiet reminder that all things fade. The slow drip of a water clock was both a tool and a companion through long nights. People didn't watch the stars for fun. They watched to stay in tune with the sky, with the land, with God. Every movement of light or shadow had meaning. Life felt full of small signs guiding people gently from one part of the day to the next. In the fields, time was muscle memory. You didn't need to check the hour. You felt it in your back, your stomach, the sun on your face. You knew when to stop, not because a clock told you, but because the earth did. Even war followed this rhythm. Armies didn't move when the weather said no. Time said wait. Time said rest. Messengers couldn't outrun rivers or snow. The seasons ruled over soldiers just like they ruled over farmers. And at every turn, faith shaped time. From the ringing of vespers to the fasting of Lent, people didn't just count days, they experienced them. A calendar wasn't just date, it was a map of feelings, rituals, flavors, silences, and celebrations. Now, centuries later, we live by numbers. Our phones beep every hour. Our meetings begin to the minute. But back then, people lived by rhythm. They didn't just keep time. They felt it. In their skin, in the sky, in the soil beneath their feet. Time was a companion, not a boss. It stretched and shrank. It warmed and cooled. It called out from towers and whispered through candlelight. It moved through the air with the smell of wet grass or baking bread. It told stories. It connected people. To understand medieval time is to understand a world where life wasn't divided into pieces but lived as a whole. A world where clocks hadn't yet taken over the heart's pace. Where people looked up, not down, to know what came next. Where the turning of stars meant more than the turning of hands. And where even silence could mean something if you knew how to listen.